The narrative was I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen, standing in for Mark on this Easter Sunday. And once again, we have a great show lined up for you. Coming up over the next 2 hours, in my big opinion, as Gaza and Chris Eubank come to blows, I say reality TV has gone too far, and it's our fault for enjoying the cruelty. In the big story, Labour have vowed to continue their controversial ad campaign, but have they gone too far with this? And 25 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, my big guest tonight is Northern Irish politician and live peer, Baroness Kate Hoey. Big guests, big stories, big opinions, a great 2 hours coming your way. But first, the headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Steve, thanks. Good evening. I'm Bethany Elsey with your top stories from the GB newsroom. A funeral service has been held for 2 British Israeli sisters who were killed in the occupied West Bank. Rina and Maya D were shot dead in their car by a suspected Palestinian gunman near an Israeli settlement on Friday. Their mother is still in hospital and is believed to be in a coma. The girls, aged 15 and 20, were born in London but moved to Israel in 2014. Their father, Rabbi Leo, led the service. He called them an inspiration and said he would love them forever. The attack comes amid a rise in conflict across the region as Easter, Ramadan and Passover coincide. Hertfordshire Police says further allegations have been made against the former Metropolitan Police officer David Carrick since his conviction earlier this year. The Guardian newspaper reports more than 10 people have contacted the force with accusations including sexual assault. The CPS is now investigating. The 48-year-old was jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years after carrying out what the court heard was a catalogue of violent and brutal sex attacks between 2003 and 2020. NHS patients face unparalleled levels of disruption when junior doctors in England strike for 4 days from Tuesday. That's the warning from the National Medical Director, Professor Stephen Powis. He says he's very concerned with hospitals facing nearly 100 hours without up to half of their medical workforce. The NHS Confederation says 250,000 appointments could be postponed. A new survey reveals more than 1 in 10 teachers have been physically assaulted by a student in the last year. The NAS UWT union says teachers have been kicked, bitten and punched by pupils, whilst 1 in 4 have faced verbal abuse from a parent or carer. At the union's annual conference in Glasgow today, members spoke about how they'd also been subjected to racism, sexual assault and homophobia. At least 4 people have been killed in an avalanche in a popular skiing area of the French Alps. It's believed the victims were hikers climbing in the Armancet glacier near Mont Blanc. Several others have been injured and a search and rescue operation is still underway. 8 people are not responding to calls and are believed to still be trapped under rubble after 2 residential buildings collapsed in Marseille. French authorities say an explosion caused the incident, but the cause is unknown. It sparked a fire that complicated rescue efforts. 5 people have been taken to hospital with serious injuries. 30 nearby buildings have been evacuated. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen. We have a lively couple of hours coming up, so settle back and enjoy. It's another bank holiday tomorrow, so you can stay up with us all the way till 11 with clear conscience. So coming up on the show, in my big opinion, as Gaza and Chris Eubank come to blows, I say reality TV, it's gone too far, and it's our fault for enjoying that cruelty. In the big story, Labour have vowed to continue their controversial ad campaign, but have they gone too far? And 25 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement, my big guest tonight is Northern Irish politician and live peer Baroness Kate Hoey. In my take at 10, after police were called to a performance of The Bodyguard, is this a side effect of the lockdown that we've forgotten how to behave? It is Sunday night, so that means Tory legend Anne Widdecombe will be here and she'll be reflecting on the legacy of Margaret Thatcher 10 years after the former Prime Minister passed away. And Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of The Papers. We'll analyse tomorrow's front pages from 10:30. And we'll be doing it with 3 top pundits who haven't been told what to say and they don't follow the script. Tonight we welcome Nigel Nelson, Linda Doubley and Neil Fox. And tonight I'll be asking my pundits, are the junior doctors' pay demands unrealistic? Should the Church of England set aside a fund to address their past links to slavery? And is the Eurovision Song Contest a chance for a cheeky entrepreneur to make some money out of this? Plus, your emails, even the spicy ones, are welcome. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Mark Dolan has one golden rule. We don't do boring, just big stories and big opinions. So let's start with this one. Is it time that we start calling reality TV what it really is? Torture porn. What started as a television genre that looked at how ordinary people live their lives now delivers the entertainment of suffering. The latest evidence of this comes from a Channel 4 show called Scared of the Dark. This is where a bunch of celebrities have to survive deprived of light. If it's in the dark, why is it on TV, not radio? But that's a side issue. It's a show that's based on some sensory deprivation. The basic TV development format here is think of something the Geneva Convention would not allow you to do and do it to people who were famous 2 decades ago. Now we're hearing that contestants Chris Eubank and Paul Gascoigne came to blows during the filming of the show. Who would have thought that that was a good idea? I know. Let's take someone who's known for his mental health struggles someone who's known for hitting people, and let's see if we can wind them right up and see what happens. On top of his well-documented problems with alcohol, the former England footballer has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, suffered with obsessive-compulsive disorder and bulimia. People are expressing shock that a TV show would put someone like that under such pressure. But they're missing the point. Reality TV is now all about making people like that suffer. When I was growing up, being a celebrity came with perks. You'd get nice treatment at restaurants and the adoration of people in the street, I guess. But now if you're a celeb, we send you to the jungle to chomp on the bit of a kangaroo that normally only Mrs. Kangaroo would go near. It's not just the famous who are made to suffer too for our entertainment. Let's get a bunch of young people who are obsessed with their looks at an age when dating really is an emotional roller coaster and watch them get dumped on an island. Let's see how that goes. And this is serious. Love Island is a show that has a death count. And yet we plough on making shows that distress people more and more. How long before we make a show called I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of This Piranha Tank? Let's see if we can cause some fistfights on Shove Island. We like to think that we've moved on since the days of ancient Rome, enjoying a day out watching some gladiators hack bits out of each other. How long till we have pro-celebrity lion fighting? Currently, you can watch shows where people get married without ever meeting the person first and they end up crying. That's called Married at First Sight. There's one where celebs get put through SAS training. There's one called Naked and Afraid, which would be a better title for Married at First Sight. Some of us don't want to see that kind of suffering. And if you don't want to see such suffering, scared of the dark might be a good idea. You can't see anything, there's no light. So what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? gbviews@gbnews.uk. I'll get to your emails after the break. So, reacting to my big opinion tonight, the brilliant set of pundits. We have GB News senior political commentator and Fleet Street legend Nigel Nelson, journalist and broadcaster Linda Dudley, and radio legend Neil Fox join me. So, Neil, first of all, let's start with you. What do you reckon to this? Have you been tempted for the reality TV? Would you like to be tortured?
No, I don't want to be tortured. I've been offered many appearances on all kinds of odd, crazy, stupid shows. And normally, my wife's a great ready reckoner for this because she just goes, are you serious? This is ridiculous. And most of them are. And what is very sad about this one is, well, Channel 4 have this habit of wrapping up programmes that are just pure entertainment that might be weird or dangerous or naughty or provocative, and they try and say it's some kind of educational experience for us. They did this with Naked Attraction, where they basically have a load of naked people trying to do blind date but with no clothes on, but it's educational. It's an experiment, apparently. This one does seem nuts, though, because firstly, it does seem rather dull, putting a load of people in a room for however many days. But they're people they were, as you said earlier, 2 decades ago they were famous, or we've never heard of them. So what's sad is how desperate people are to be on telly, isn't it, really? To be on any kind of show. Why would you sign up for this? Either because you're trying to make a name for yourself or you're trying to re-establish yourself. I think what's really sad about the Gaza thing, there's a man we do know. We've seen him slightly unravel in front of us for years in the papers. I wish someone in the world of football who earn astronomical, vast sums of money would just give him some money. Obviously, he hasn't got cash, right? That's why he's doing a programme like this, and just take him away, all his mates, give him some cash and to help sort him out, because he needs some help, doesn't he, really? That's what he needs, some mates.
I think Gary Lineker did, actually. He gave him some money. So a number of people have come and helped him out, but he is a troubled individual. He is. That's been for a long time.
Yeah. And should the programme makers allow him on it, really? Because you go, I know it probably makes great telly, but no.
What do you think about that? Do the TV programme makers have more responsibility?
Of course they should have more responsibility. I read a quote from the head of events, Tom Beck, about this particular programme, and you're right, Neil, it was couched in terms of being a sort of pseudo-experimental stroke education programme. In fact, Paul Gascoigne has really serious, wide-ranging mental health issues. Saying that you've got a therapist along to advise you is a bit like doing a marathon and giving them a first aid tin instead of a defibrillator. It's a ridiculous idea. But it's not really the actual detail that's so concerning here. It's the overarching premise of why we want to watch something so deeply unpleasant. And you hit upon it in your intro, which I thought was brilliant. You know, these are acts. They're not just like acts that are forbidden by the Geneva Convention. Actually depriving someone of light is in the Geneva Convention. It's called an enhanced interrogation technique. But why we would want to watch people doing that is completely beyond me.
Yeah. Nigel, do you think that's where the responsibility lies? It's us. We actually, as a people, not individually, people sat around this sofa, like watching shows where people are put under pressure. There's just something about this story that people care too much about Gaza to see him be punished. That feels like that's cruel. But we, in general, millions of people watch these TV shows where people suffer.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a really sort of depressing cultural change in this country. If you remember, if we go back 30 years, and Clive James and Chris Tarrant were on TV taking the pee out of the Japanese trial by ordeal show, Endurance, and that had people sort of tied to the wheels of paddle steamers until they could stand no more, or covered in worms. But in fact, I was actually watching a bit of some of the reruns of it this afternoon. If you look at that, it's mild compared to what the contestants on I'm a Celebrity have to go through. So on the basis of that, we have a sort of situation where we seem to have gone back in time, and you've got it absolutely right, Steve, there. We suddenly want the Roman arena back again. I mean, what has happened to us?
It's really unpleasant. And one of the things I think that sometimes TV executives underestimate is the value of really fantastic, well-made drama. They see the evidence of their own viewing figures when they get them. But the truth of the matter is it requires imagination to commission them, and it requires money to produce them. And that's why we're not getting the television I think we deserve, is because we're doing everything on a shoestring.
And I think one thing you do have to add as well, that when having been around these kind of shows before, they are cast like they are a drama, right? So people will be sitting there and going, OK, let's find someone who's very camp. Let's find someone who's very homophobic. Let's find someone who's doesn't like this, someone who's extreme left and someone who's extreme right. Let's try and create a situation where people might explode because it makes good telly. You know, Big Brother was the first that did that. The first series was just dull. We watched people in a house, and it was quite entertaining. Then, of course, you worked out, OK, now have we got some... Now, once people had seen these programmes, you know what, as a punter, you're meant to do if you want to get more airtime.
Exactly.
So people start doing things that they wouldn't really do because they want to be on telly.
Can I just say, I used to work on a programme called Tonight with Trevor McDonald. I think it's called Tonight now, an ITV programme. And we used to wrap around, you get the story together, get the elements together, and we used to call it 4 contributors and an expert witness. A bit like the film, really. But you had to have these 4 contributors, and they all had to tick several boxes.
Yeah.
This is a news programme.
Yeah,
that's what's really worrying.
Yeah.
Because that makes sense for a news programme to achieve the goal of having, the information, the balance, all of that. What we're achieving with getting people to fight is the most base instinct of humanity, isn't it? Let's see people fall out, and now it turns out they actually come to blows.
Yeah,
look at Twitter.
But someone like Paul Gascoigne into a situation like that. I mean, we've all lived with the problems he's had for 20 years, and you don't have to be a psychologist to know you shouldn't shove him into a show like this because there's bound to be trouble.
Yeah.
So, I mean, will it ever change? Because as much as we're sitting here blaming the TV producers and the production companies, we're the ones watching it. It's like people say of the newspapers, I think it's terrible that they report news like this, but then we all buy the ones that have the salacious front pages.
I don't know. I've never watched a single episode of Love Island. I've never watched a single episode of Big Brother, and I've never watched a single episode of The Jungle One. I just don't like it. I really don't like it.
I have watched all of them at times because my kids particularly love Love Island, and my daughter does.
Yeah.
And look, I used to think, gosh, where's this going to end up? It'll end up with someone dying. Sadly, we've had people dying now, and still they keep going. So I don't know what will stop them, really. I suppose you can't just blame the programme makers. Look at society. Look at politics. Look at the way people talk about each other in politics now. Look how people talk about each other on social media, in the press. I mean, we've sadly sunk lower and lower, and I suppose programme makers, to a certain extent, are slightly reflecting what is going on in society.
You've got to watch these things, really, to be appalled by them. So I think it's worth you actually watching them at some point.
You might get hooked, Linda. That's what you're scared about. You're going to get hooked on Love Island.
We'll talk about it.
It's the same thing as when someone has food that tastes horrible and they say, try this, it's horrible. Watch this TV show. It will waste hours of your life watching.
But I've seen the promos. Obviously, I've seen the promos.
And
I just think, oh, my God, do I want to watch someone eating a kangaroo's anus or whatever it is they have to read?
Hancock. That was actually quite good.
Yeah. If you put a load of politicians in the jungle...
That was quite funny.
Yeah, but a whole load of them. Or, of course, put them in the amphitheatre with the lions. I think a lot of us
Do you
might
know
find
what I
that
think
quite
the
entertaining.
danger is that you've got reality television moving that way and politics moving that way, and sooner or later it'll be like a Venn diagram. There'll be something.
Well, it already has Matt Hancock and I'm a Celebrity. We had it.
Oh, that's right. It's already happened. Sorry, I forgot that.
Your thoughts welcome on this as well. And coming up, the big story. The Labour Party have vowed to continue their controversial attack ads. A step too far for legitimate political strategy? We'll see you in 3.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion.
Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m.
as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the show. So the big domestic political story continues to be Labour's controversial adverts in which they accuse Rishi Sunak and his Conservative government of being soft on crime. The Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper has distanced herself from the ad, which claims that Sunak does not think child sex abusers should go to prison. But Labour appear to be undeterred and are apparently planning to continue with the attack ads until the election next year. Former editor of Labour List and friend of the show, Peter Edwards, joins me now to talk about this. Good evening, Peter. I mean, are these adverts beyond the pale, or is this a legitimate campaign strategy?
I think it was an unwise move. The Tories are no strangers to personal attacks, and you'll all remember Tony Blair and Demonised from '97. But to me, this was a bridge too far because it was, first of all, it's way too personal, and secondly, it was essentially wrong as well because while there is absolutely legitimate criticism to be made of the government for their handling of the justice system and funding cuts, the stats covered a 10-year period, and Rishi Sunak's been Prime Minister for a fraction of that.
But I suppose this comes hot on the tails of Boris Johnson accusing Keir Starmer of not investigating Jimmy Savile, also People at the time from both parties distanced themselves from that comment, saying it's not based on truth, but it seems to be a sticky message. Is that what the Labour Party's going for?
I don't think he's going for that. And the Boris Johnson reference to Keir Starmer when he ran the CPS and Jimmy Savile was a pretty disgusting one, and it sank like a lead balloon, thankfully. I don't think this is quite in the same territory, but it's still pretty unpleasant. And it was interesting that Lucy Powell, who I respect a lot as a very effective and decent shadow cabinet minister, was clearly a little bit uncomfortable with it and very caveated in her remarks about it. As I say, there is a legitimate critique of, I think I looked at the Ministry of Justice, funding's been cut by 25% over 9 years, but this is not the way to land that critique.
It's part of the problem that, I mean, as though mudslinging has always been involved in politics, but the fact that it is so personal, that seems to be the difference here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of these unwritten codes we have in Britain, a bit like the Constitution. So you referred to a Boris Johnson claim that was extremely unpleasant. The Tories had the demonised poster about Tony Blair in '97, contrasting him with that Bambi image. And Jeremy Corbyn, who by all accounts was not very effective at all, but was repeatedly referred to as a man who hates Britain, which I don't think was true either. It's just his definition of patriotism was different to that of many others. So I think the personal stuff just turns the public off, and this is another example of that.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting points. I was hearing someone discuss earlier that this might backfire because it might make people actually have sympathy for Rishi Sunak because he's so named in these campaigns. These aren't just simply statements about the Conservatives, they're statements about Rishi.
Well, yeah, there used to be a law that you couldn't use other politicians' images and signatures and so on in ads, and I believe that was been dropped in the last 20 years. So you do see a lot more of this type of thing, and David Cameron, as leader of the opposition, had a series of mocked-up photos of Gordon Brown looking a bit daft, which was unfair. But this goes further than that because it's obviously linked to child sex crime offences, which are very serious. But at the risk perhaps of sounding a little bit boring, I actually think, having been a candidate and knocked on thousands of doors, the reasons why people vote are very traditional. GP waiting times, NHS, classroom sizes, crime. And yes, we're all aware of austerity, and austerity has been a disaster for this country, delivered by the Tories. But the posters we've seen the last couple of days are not the way to land that point.
But that is what they're trying to do, isn't it? Trying to become we may well have lost him. We'll cut to my pundits on this topic. So if you've seen any of these pictures that have been tweeted, it is some people saying that it could be causing, if anything, more sympathy for anything for the Labour Party to get the sympathy for Rishi Sunak might go the wrong way. So for more on this, let's go to the pundits. Start with Neil. What's your thoughts on this? What's your emotional response to seeing it?
Well, my emotional response is, weirdly, this connects to the conversation we were having about reality TV and how everything is becoming this sort of blurred mess to a certain extent. The messaging that human beings in this country are using at the moment is getting quite unpleasant. And I think what Labour have done here is look at how people talk about each other on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, or any of these different platforms. And it's often not pleasant. It's all about a one headline or a one word or a one phrase. And to a certain extent, that feels the sort of messaging they're probably thinking. This is how a lot of younger people, maybe how they read information, how they actually take their information now in small bite-sized chunks, and it can be unpleasant. And actually, if it's not even true, it doesn't matter. Let's put it out there. I don't think, actually, as you get said, I think they've got this one wrong, because if it gets too personal, I think it actually turns people off, and I think they just get irritated by it. It irritates me. Clever campaigns are good. Point out problems, that's good. That's politics. But when it gets to this level, you kind of wonder at what level has politics sunk to. Sadly, it seems to be almost to reality TV level, and that's not where I would like to see it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll take your point, Neil, but also, Linda, I'll bring you in on this one. That's saying almost as if the reason we shouldn't like it. I mean, it's not gone well, has it? This doesn't seem to be approved of on either side of the political spectrum. So this is not just about politics heading to the lowest common denominator and, like reality TV, we lap this up. No one seems to be lapping this up.
No, I don't think anyone has. And I think if anyone was going to do some kind of risk calculation on this, they should have realised the strong possibility that this approach would backfire. I think there's a Latin phrase, isn't there, ad hominem, which means that you take down the man and not the policy. And it's really, really bad. It's the politics of the gutter. There's no point in taking down Rishi Sunak anyway, because he wasn't involved in any kind of stuff about child sex offenders, because he wasn't in a position to be in the time period concerned. He wasn't, in fact, even an MP for 5 of those years. And yet, weirdly, it was Keir Starmer who was actually on the Sentencing Council during the period in question. And then on top of all of that, the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, appears not to have even known that this was about to happen. That is the woman who's in charge of the shadow crime policy, and she didn't know what was going on. So I don't know what's happening here, but I think my overarching view is that it's chaotic and deeply unpleasant for the general public, i.e. the voter.
Yeah. Nigel, do you think this is going to have to end? Will they have to somehow phase their way out of... Labour have to phase their way out of doing tweets like this?
Well, I hope they do. I mean, what Keir Starmer has always promised is integrity and honour in politics. And this hardly sort of matches that test, that he seems to have sunk to the level of personal abuse that Boris Johnson did. And the whole point of Keir Starmer was that he would rise above that. Now, the other point about this sort of ad is it's bound to actually backfire. Does anyone seriously believe that Rishi Sunak wants to keep rapists out of jail? I mean, it's just an absurd kind of claim. So on the basis of that, I rather hope that Labour would have pulled the ad by now, not continue with the campaign, but all the indications are they're going to stick to their guns and carry on with that.
OK, and we've got the line back up, the tech's working, so we can go back to the former editor of Labour List, Peter Edwards. Peter, do you think they're saying they're staying with it just to save face and will phase it out, or do you truly believe that the Labour Party will keep sending us tweets like this?
I don't believe that this type of campaign will run its course, and I hope it doesn't. You know, I'll give you another quick example. Remember, Ed Miliband was described by Sir Michael Fallon as he stabbed his brother in the back, and he'd stabbed Britain in the back. Within 2 or 3 minutes of that speech, he was condemned by reporters who normally are independent and don't rush out with their opinions and everything. And the Tories didn't revisit that topic again. Now, one could argue that was a dead cat strategy. We say something nasty once and hope it lodges in people's mind, and then change tack. But no, I believe this campaign will be, you know, curtailed and downgraded, and the sooner the better, quite frankly.
Do we judge the Labour Party more harshly? If this happened the other way around, would we be having this kind of debate?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think something I find as a Labour activist is that we're all quite idealistic, and I think perhaps Conservatives sometimes, and I have Conservative friends, are perhaps quite pragmatic about some of their politics. I think there's always a risk for Labour that it will say, and you saw this a bit under Corbyn, we're nicer than the other guys and girls, vote for us because we care a bit more. And similarly, the Tories have sometimes played on a strategy of, yes, we are a bit mean, but we're competent, especially on things like the economy. I think both of those approaches are completely reductive, because Boris Johnson showed the Tories are not competent, and some of the events in Labour over the last 5 years have shown that while a lot of Labour folk are lovely, they're not always like that 100% of the time. Everyone, and I do stress this on all sides, every party has lapses of judgment occasionally.
OK, well, thank you for that. That's Peter Edwards, former editor of Labour List. Coming up next, we'll do 3 quickfire topics with the pundits. We will ask, are the doctors' pays demands unrealistic? Should the Church of England have set aside funds because of its past links to slavery? And should Airbnb hosts in Liverpool get to raise their prices just because of a certain song competition that's heading their way? We'll see you shortly.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back. Thank you for your emails on what we're talking about. Some of them are here. Peter says that when you see the way politicians carry on and how disrespectful to each other they are, no wonder the country is going to pieces. They should show respect to each other. Andy says, didn't Margaret Thatcher say, when they attack you personally, it means they don't have a political argument left? And Nick says, Keir Starmer and Labour are getting desperate. Personally attacking your opponent at gutter level shows that they are losing public support and voters. Sooner or later, Rishi will fix it when Starmer couldn't, and fix it was in quote marks. Naughty. Well, that's joining me through the show. We have the pundits, which includes GB News' political commentator and Fleet Street legend Nigel Nelson, journalist and broadcaster Linda Doubley, and radio legend Neil Fox. Now, senior medical professionals are warning that this week's planned junior strikes are certain to put the NHS under huge pressure. The 96-hour walkout due to begin on Tuesday will lead to cancelled operations. What the NHS National Medical Director, Sir Stephen Parry, says will be unparalleled levels of disruption. Health Secretary Stephen Barclay appears unwilling to compromise. He wrote in The Telegraph that requests for a 35% pay rise are unrealistic. Linda, what do you think then? So the compensation for 15 years below inflation, pay rises, is this realistic to ask for it all in one lump sum?
Well, I can understand why they're doing it. I don't know how realistic it is. But the real problem here isn't so much that the teachers are asking for more money, nurses are asking for more money, doctors are asking for more money. The real problem is no growth in the economy. That's the underlying problem. So until we get that sorted out and we grip inflation, we get that sorted out as well, these wage battles aren't going to go away. And many of them are with some of our most essential key workers who have to be supported. Now, junior doctors work very, very, very long weeks and they earn £55,000. Now, that's not that much for doing what they do. I don't care what anyone says. I think they do deserve more money. And really, they're pushed right up against a wall now. They have to take industrial action. That's that.
Nigel, is it about the absolute amount that they get paid, or is it more about this building up over the years, not having a pay rise that matches with inflation? So regardless of what you get paid, 10 years ago you would have in real terms, been being paid more.
Yeah, that's right. And that's their argument for this 35% pay rise. But in answer to the original question, yeah, it's unrealistic. There's no way the government can do that. If they started paying out 35%, they'd have to pay it to other people too. So, but the junior doctors know it's unrealistic. What they want is for Steve Barclay, the health secretary, to talk to them realistically about pay. Steve Barclay says, no, I won't talk to you till you call off your strike. So you end up with a stalemate. If Steve Barclay would say tomorrow or on Tuesday morning, right, lads, come in, I've got a realistic offer to give you, let's talk about it, that strike would be called off.
And that's the way it's gone. There have been, with previous strikes, the claim that, no, there'll be no talking. And, of course, a strike will only ever end with talking. It's like that scene in that Peter Capaldi Doctor Who episode. You end a war, of course it has to end with sitting around a table discussing things.
Yeah.
And you must have negotiated some contracts in your time. You always highball at the start, don't you?
Well, yeah, look, of course you do. And I think everything I've read about, that none of these people want to strike. I mean, apart from maybe a few militant people, they want to go to work. And like everyone, whether it's been the nurses or the train drivers, whoever it may be, I suppose you just want to get paid fairly for what you do. The young doctors have a really strained life, it seems. Not that I've ever been one, but everything I've read and we know, the hours are ridiculous. And although 55 grand sounds like a lot of money, and it's not a small amount of money for what they get paid, it's hard work. I suppose if you factor in inflation, they reckon they're like 26% down on what they were many years ago. So, but that's the same, I guess, probably with the nurses and for everyone at the moment, and teachers. And I suppose, as you said, nothing will ever happen unless people will sit down around a table and talk, but talk sensibly. And I suppose these are the kind of people, you don't go into it to make loads of money to go into you go into it because it's a vocation, right? So for nurses and doctors, you get into it for that reason. So I can't imagine that they know the devastation, the problems it will cause with people not having operations, not getting emergency treatment, and there were others that aren't striking. We've just had COVID, we went through all that, we're out there clapping every Thursday night, or we were for a certain time. And it seems that got very quickly forgotten. And this is a conversation that probably should have been going on a lot sooner than it's been going on. It's come to a real head now. And you just want some sensible heads to get together and go, let's get round the table, please, for everyone concerned. How can we best sort it out? There isn't any money in the pot. You know the problems. But on the other hand, how can we help you so this doesn't happen again?
You want people to talk sensibly. You're optimistic, aren't you? Archbishop of Canterbury Justin Welby used his Easter sermon today, in part, to defend the fund set up to address the Church of England's past links to slavery. The £100 million social impact fund was pledged in January, and Welby says it's not post-colonial guilt, but there was, quote, impossible not to respond when we see that we had done actions that denied the reality of God's universal power and love. Nigel, is the Archbishop right about this?
Well, the first question is, where did he find this £100 million? I thought the church was actually rather poor, and an awful lot of them are falling down. So suddenly he brings this money out from the back of the sofa and says we can actually make reparations for slavery. The overall question is, should you be making reparations and apologising for everything that happened in our past history? My own view is that it should be for things within living memory, or where relatives of people affected are still alive, where you actually can do some good. The idea of going back into history and constantly making reparations is difficult. However, it seems to be the Archbishop's money. If he wants to spend it that way, that's his choice. I think that if the government started doing it, and it was us taxpayers affected, we might have something to say about it.
Yeah. Linda, what do you think about this? I mean, we're talking reparations a lot in the news at the moment.
I know. I think the question here is that the money the Archbishop is talking about is the money made off the back of slavery hundreds of years ago that continues to affect some organisations and some communities and some people these days. So a part of that money should go to those people. But I'm really against the idea that you continually pay reparations historically or right across the board has got to be a mistake, because you just can't afford to keep doing that. History is history. It's happened and we need to move on. I think it's wrong all the time. I think the one thing I would say about, I've read the Archbishop's speech, is that he talks about it not being attached to post-colonial guilt. I I mean, he should just have left that out of it. Because what do we need to know that? We don't need to know that. We don't need an excuse. I mean, like Nigel, I am surprised. He obviously looked under the mattress and found this amount of money, and it did surprise me. But we don't need any justification and then a quite long and incomprehensible splurge about the mercy of God. Now, I was at Mass this morning and I listened to my priest's sermon. I thought it was brilliant, actually. And I think sermons are great, but I think his was hard to understand. The bottom line, to me, it was a bit incomprehensible.
Yeah. Did you comprehend it, Neil?
Well, I think I find quite a lot of his speeches quite up his backside, I've got to be honest. If I'm being really honest, I do.
That's gone to hell.
No. Well, I hope not, but I have to say it doesn't always make sense to me. Researchers found the church's $9 billion plus perpetual endowment fund originated partly in something called the Queen Anne's Bounty, which started back in 1704. But there's a $9 billion plus perpetual endowment fund, so $100 million is fairly small out of that. But look, how they spend their money is up to them. But on the other hand, I suppose if you are... I mean, there are so many places, there's so many small villages or towns now don't have a permanent priest or anyone, or a vicar. They have to share them. And so sometimes you can't even go to your local church on a Sunday anymore. Wouldn't potentially, out of the $9 billion, maybe spend some of the money on that? So, I mean, in a way, you employ enough people so that people can go to church. That seems to be a fundamental thing about church to me.
Most of $9 billion left after you take that amount.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah. Well, finally, the Eurovision Song Contest comes to Liverpool next month, and it seems a few entrepreneurs have seen a chance to make a few quid out of it. Airbnb have had to take action, warning that they will stop their hosts raising prices for people who are coming to the city for the contest. An extra 150,000 are expected to make their way to Liverpool for the event. Neil, is it fair? I mean, you know your music, you know how great this music is going to be. Did you pay over the odds to be in Liverpool for this?
OK, so hang on, OK. I think it's a slight tongue-in-cheek there. Look, the Eurovision, weirdly, has become almost a cult viewing experience now, even though the music is potentially crap, let's be honest. Although, to be fair...
So you're going to hell twice?
No. Britain's Eurovision entry last with Sam Ryder was really good, actually, for the first time, and it did really well. Yeah. So I think it's sort of gone through a transition. It's getting better. Look, are these people wrong to basically go, we've got a lot of people coming to our city, there aren't enough rooms, we're going to put our prices up. Good luck to them. I tell you what, no one complains in Wimbledon when they do exactly the same thing when a load of people are arriving at Wimbledon or the players want to rent a house. Good luck. And do you know what? The market will dictate. If it came with one case that a guy had got a flat for 5 nights for 450 quid, the guy who was Airbnb-ing it got back to him and he realised it was all for Eurovision, going, it's £2,000 now. Try to change the price. And you go, well, if he can charge £2,000, let him get away with it. If no one pays it, he'll reduce his prices. That's how it works.
See, price gouging is wrong when people are allowed to profit from a really awful thing like some kind of terrorist attack or a conflict or something like that. People shouldn't profiteer out of a bad situation like that. But Neil's right. When Wimbledon happens or when another big event like that happens, market forces come into play. If the guy can do it and he advertises his house at a certain rate, he should be able to do it.
Yeah. It's not like you can't see it as well. It is available free on the telly.
Yeah, exactly. Which is probably where I should watch it from, rather than going up there.
You will watch it. But impressive.
I enjoyed it last year.
Yeah, okay.
This is what happens with an unregulated free market, that people make excess profits and prices go through the roof. So the argument here is it should be regulated a bit more. The poor guy who'd actually got his Airbnb for 450 quid and then gets charged almost 4 times the amount, I'd have thought he's got a good case in law to say, look, I did a deal with you at 450, you accepted the money, you can't now change it.
Because that's a contractual breach.
Well, I would have thought so.
That's absolutely wrong. But I don't think there's anything wrong with people being able to profiteer out of a big event like this if they've got the space. Let's face it, they may have suffered.
What you should be charging is this is what Airbnb is saying. You should be charging reasonable prices. Certainly make a bit extra.
How do you define reasonable?
Well, the guy who actually spent his 450 quid, which he thought rather than the 2,000, his argument was if it went up 50 quid a night, that'd be reasonable. I think that's about right.
Yeah, but I think there could be. But There was a breach of a contractual agreement then. That's the point, not the amount. They breached the agreement.
But he would have accepted a higher price.
It's the irony. It's the Eurovision Song Contest, and we're making a big song and dance
I
about
know.
Yeah. Still to come tonight, we have the papers at 10:30 with full reaction from my brilliant pundits. But coming up next, Northern Irish politician and peer Kate Hoey will be here to discuss the Good Friday Agreement 25 years since it was signed.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen. This weekend marks 25 years since the historic Good Friday Agreement was signed, bringing a measure of peace to Northern Ireland after years of violent conflicts known as the Troubles. The agreement was signed on the 10th of April 1998 by then Prime Minister Tony Blair, then Taoiseach, or Irish Prime Minister Bertie Ahern. It was subsequently approved by public vote in Northern Ireland as well as the Republic of Ireland and established the system of power sharing between the main parties, which remains high on the news agenda to this day. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will welcome President Joe Biden to Northern Ireland on Tuesday to mark the anniversary. I'm delighted now to be joined by Northern Irish politician and life peer Baroness Kate Hoey, who served as Labour MP for Vauxhall from 1989 to 2019. Good evening, Kate. So tell us of the significance of the Good Friday Agreement.
Good evening. Well, looking back 25 years, it was very significant at the time, and the Prime Minister, Tony Blair, did put in a huge amount of work to get it over the line. It was something that at the time, to many people in the pro-union community, was seen as, you know, the end of the whole question of people demanding a united Ireland. It was seen as once and for all that the Irish Republic had accepted that the constitutional status of Northern Ireland would not change until such time as the people of Northern Ireland decided they wanted to change it. And of course, a lot of people voted for it. I supported it at the time. I went along and over to Northern Ireland and campaigned for it. But there were some very difficult parts of it. Releasing terrorists after a very short time was something that was very unpalatable to many, many people. But the overall principle was that this would end the killing. And of course, it did stop the very large, very strong, large amounts of killing that had gone on. But it didn't bring ultimately peace in the sense of the two communities coexisting very well, although things over the last 25 years have been better. But it's rather ironic, I think, that just as people are commemorating it, that actually the Belfast Agreement is now pretty shattered. The Stormont is not sitting, and even David Trimble, who was one of the architects of the Belfast Agreement just before he died, wrote to say that it had been completely broken by the protocol. So we're in a situation where there's going to be lots of kind of memorials to it, but actually on a day-to-day basis now, it's probably the Belfast Agreement is broken, and that is going to require a great deal of fixing.
So talk to us about the role that the Good Friday Agreement plays in the disputes about the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Well, the reality is that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement had nothing in it about borders and structures at borders. All it said was that it wanted to make sure there was no security infrastructure at the border. Unfortunately, when the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and people in Northern Ireland had the same ballot paper saying, do you want to leave as the UK, not do you want to leave Northern Ireland out, the European Union, coupled with the Irish government, realised that this was quite a soft spot left to punish the United Kingdom for leaving, and that Northern Ireland, and they kept going on over and over again, we can't possibly have a border, a hard border, they kept using the word hard border without defining it, on the island of Ireland. And so ultimately, our own government then accepted that there would be a border down the Irish Sea, dividing our own country. So we're now in this ridiculous situation, even with the Windsor Framework, which was the recent changes to the protocol, hasn't really changed the structural issue that Northern Ireland has been left under EU rules in the single market for trading issues and under the European Court of Justice. And so as the rest of Great Britain diverges more and more from the EU, Northern Ireland will be left behind. And that is now the main reason why Stormont's not sitting, why the Democratic Unionist Party have said they won't go back in. And in the form of government that was set up by the Belfast Agreement, it has to be a form of power sharing. So it has to be the two communities working together. And so Sinn Féin a few years ago brought down the Assembly for 3 years. Now the DUP have brought it down for over a year. And we're in a situation where Biden's coming on Tuesday. He can't actually even go to Stormont to address the MLAs because Stormont's not sitting. And I think the whole thing would be a little bit of a hyping up of something that actually, because of the action of our own government, is no longer working.
So if we pay attention to the news and realise there's been a rise in violence lately, do you think the motivating force is the issue to do with the Northern Ireland Protocol, or are other factors at work here?
Well, I think that obviously there have always been elements within the Republican movement who haven't given up on the violence attitude towards getting what they want, which is a united Ireland. And we have seen breakaway groups from the official, the official IRA, the main IRA, provisional IRA, and now we've got the real IRA, who were responsible recently for the attack on the police sergeant in Northern Ireland just a couple of weeks ago. And we are, it is worrying. It is worrying because there are groups that may not be very big and they may not have the huge support that the IRA had, but they're there and they have threatened, and our security forces have definitely got intelligence that they're wanting to, make some kind of attack. Now, whether they would do it when Biden is here, President Biden, because President Biden hasn't actually shown much interest in Northern Ireland. He is very, very Irish. I mean, he even made a comment one day about, made a joke at St. Patrick's Day, which didn't go down very well, about no orange here when he was standing in front of a lot of Irish people. So, there's not huge enthusiasm for Biden coming anyway. But I think it's unlikely that the elements of republicanism would want to upset the Americans in that way. So, but yes, there is no doubt about it that things are not good in Northern Ireland, and I'm afraid our own government has a lot of responsibility for that.
Thank you very much, Northern Irish politician and life peer Baroness Kate Hoey. Still to come on the show, Anne Widdecombe will be here to talk about the legacy of Margaret Thatcher 10 years after her death. Plus, we'll have the papers at 10:30, but next in my Take at 10, after police were called to the Bodyguard musical, I'll be asking if the side effect of the lockdown is that we've forgotten how to behave.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen. It's a great first hour. We've got plenty more for you coming up on the show tonight. In my take at 10, as police are called to a production of The Bodyguard, I'll ask if it spells in lockdown that made us forget how to behave. It is 10 years since former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher passed away, and Anne Widdecombe will be here to assess the legacy of one of the most influential political figures of the last century. And of course, myself and my brilliant pundits will get stuck into all of Monday's front pages. That'll be on the dot at 10:30. More great content coming your way on Britain's news channel. But first, the headlines with Bethany Elsey.
Steve, thank you. I'm Bethany Elsey with the latest from the GB newsroom. A funeral service has been held for two British-Israeli sisters who were killed in the occupied West Bank. Rina and Maya D, aged 15 and 20, were shot dead in their car by a suspected Palestinian gunman near an Israeli settlement on Friday. Their mother is still in hospital and is believed to be in a coma. Their father, Rabbi Leo, led the service. He called them an inspiration and said he would love them forever. The attack comes amid a rise in conflict across the region as Easter, Ramadan and Passover coincide. Hertfordshire Police says further allegations have been made against the former Metropolitan Police officer, David Carrick, since his conviction earlier this year. The Guardian newspaper reports more than 10 people have contacted the force with accusations, including sexual assault. The CPS is now investigating. The 48-year-old was jailed for life with a minimum term of 32 years after carrying out what the court heard was a catalogue of violent and brutal sex attacks between 2003 and 2020. NHS leaders are warning a 4-day strike by junior doctors in England will cause unparalleled levels of disruption for patients. The National Medical Director, Professor Stephen Powers, says he's very concerned with hospitals facing 100 hours without up to half of their medical workforce. Junior doctors will walk out from Tuesday in an ongoing dispute over pay. The NHS Confederation says 250,000 appointments could be postponed. A new survey reveals more than 1 in 10 teachers have been physically assaulted by a student in the last year. The NASUWT union says teachers have been kicked, bitten and punched by pupils, whilst 1 in 4 have faced verbal abuse from a parent or carer. At the union's annual conference in Glasgow, members also spoke about how they'd been subjected to racism, sexual assault and homophobia. At least 4 people have been killed in an avalanche in a popular skiing area of the French Alps. It's believed the victims were hikers climbing in the Amonsette glacier near Mont Blanc. Several others have been injured and a search and rescue operation is still underway. The King, Queen Consort and other senior royals have attended an Easter church service at Windsor Castle. It was held at St George's Chapel and was the first of King Charles's reign. The occasion falls on the 2nd anniversary of Prince Philip's death. Both he and the late Queen have been laid to rest in the grounds of the chapel. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News.
Welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen. Still to come before 11 tonight. In my take at 10, I'll ask if our behaviour has got worse since lockdowns, or am I just becoming less tolerant? It is 10 years since former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher passed away, and Anne Widdecombe will be here to assess her legacy. And of course, we'll take a look at the Easter Monday front pages, 10:30 sharp for that. It's big stories, big guests, and always big opinions. Let's start with my take at 10. If ever there's a media outlet that talks about the effects of lockdown, you've found it. But here's one that we might not have mentioned enough. Has our spell at staying at home made us forget how to behave? You may have seen this week the news that a performance of The Bodyguard had to be abandoned because the audience were kicking off. Ironically, they needed a bodyguard. One over-enthusiastic audience member was singing along to I Will Always Love You, which wasn't a sentiment shared by the people sat near her, and it led to a scuffle. The lights were dropped, the mic was cut, the show was over because of the behaviour of someone who wouldn't just sit there and watch. They have signs at musicals these days saying, please do not sing along. But imagine being so entitled or unself-aware that you think it's about you doing what you want to do. Now, this only seems to be a problem at the theatre. I haven't spotted any stories yet about people turning up to the opera with a bottle of red wine hidden in their bag and the urge to knock out Bizet's Carmen. And maybe it's our fault for changing the kind of musicals that we make these days. We're so used to jukebox musicals, where they deliberately pick songs that people love to sing along to. But wouldn't you think about the enjoyment of everyone else sat near you? You certainly would if you sing like me. Now, behaviour at some stand-up gigs, I've noticed, has got worse. Some gigs, even normal audience members act like they're in a hen do. Hen dos, by the way, are our natural predator. There's nothing more worrying than walking on stage and seeing an L plate. L plate. And some of them look like they could sit there advanced. And that's a compliment. Now, I've commented to some other comedians about unruly audiences, saying, I bet they wouldn't act like that if they were going to the cinema. And the other comedians point out that it must have been a long time since I've been to the cinema because they are filled with people on their phones eating their 3-course meal while talking all the way through the film. And that's fine when you're doing that sat in front of your own Netflix during lockdown, but now that we're back out in the multiplex, we should be more considerate again. Is this because we weren't sociable for a while? I mean, it's impacted my ability to do small talk. I have awkward silences before blurting out, I like Star Wars, and then going off to get another drink. Recently, we heard how British holiday makers in Spain could face £688 fines after the Costa del Sol has been cracking down on stag parties. New rules include a ban on underwear, and I hope they explain that means showing it, not wearing it. So, think about that. Our behaviour is so bad, other countries are bringing in new rules to counter it. But has there actually been a decline in the standard of behaviour, or am I simply getting older and moaning more? I can't blame that on the lockdowns. So what do you think? Do you agree or disagree? gbviews@gbnews.uk, and I'll get your emails after the break. Reacting to my take at 10 tonight, it's GB News senior political commentator and Fleet Street legend Nigel Nelson, journalist and broadcaster Linda Doubley, and radio legend Neil Fox. So we'll start, Neil. Have you noticed that audiences are getting a little less easy to control?
Well, I thought your monologue was interesting because there are lots more jukebox musicals, close inverted commas, being made now, which is in a way an easy way to fill up theatres. Songs, so you go along knowing exactly what kind of songs you're going to get, whether it's Grease or, you know, there are so many out there now, and this is obviously one of them, Bodyguard, turned great movies where we know all the songs into a stage adaptation. The hard thing is, of course, we know the songs, we've heard them all on the radio, I play them on the radio, people do, and people know how to sing along and want to sing along, and that's part of the reason they're chosen to be in those musicals. So it's quite, I can slightly sympathise. On the other hand, it must be a real pain in the rear end if you're there enjoying some, you know, amazing singer do I Will Always Love You, and you've got someone behind you who doesn't sound that good, trying to warble away and give it their version. And you'd probably want to go, shh, please, quiet, we're trying to watch. But if it keeps going, I can understand. I mean, this turned into a proper fight, didn't it? A full-on fight where the bouncers needed to be caught, security, and it all gets completely out of hand, and then the show stops. How tragic. Now there are signs in all these theatres saying, please don't sing along, which seems slightly insane. I mean, obviously, with stuff like, you know, Phantom or Les Mis, it's much harder to sing along. When you know all the words, it is a lot easier. But, I mean, people just need to shut up and have some respect also. For the people who are on stage, you've paid money to go and see. There are musicals out there designed for you to sing along, or movie versions where the words come up on the screen. Go do that, or go do karaoke. Don't do it in the theatre.
Yeah, even though I might know all the words to Les Mis, it's the range. That's why I can't sing along. Oh, that's a high note. Linda, do you think, am I just being an old-fashioned person who moans about things more, or do you actually think that our ability to behave with other people around us has been impacted, and was that the lockdown?
I think it's been impacted by lockdown, but I also think it's been impacted by the society in which we live right now. And I think in that respect, this story is connected to two other stories we've mentioned tonight, and it's about general behaviour in society. Now, at the end of the day, it's a matter of common sense. You know that there's a musical on or some kind of performance that you can sing along with. You know what they're likely to be. You go along, and when it comes to the main number, when you're supposed to join in, you join in. But let's be really, really clear about what happened, and it was at the Manchester Palace Theatre. This was an unprecedented level of violence that was so extreme that the police had to be called, not just internal security, the police. Now, when things get to that level, I think they have gone too far. These people that go along, and sometimes I've been to performances where I might have gone and joined in, that's all fine. Might have, but...
Might have.
You were there. That mean you did, didn't you? That was you in Manchester, wasn't it? Come on.
No. But what I think these people do not do is they do not respect the performer, right, who works hard at delivering something worthwhile for money. They do not respect the theatre staff. I have a child that works in the theatre, and I know that this is the case, and they do not respect other members of the audience which are trying to listen to the performance. Now, at the Manchester Palace Theatre, that whole performance had to end 10 minutes early, and the big show number, the showstopper, couldn't even be performed because of these members in the audience. Now, maybe that is because of lockdown. I'm not so interested in why it's happening. I'm just interested in the fact that it should stop. And actually, while I'm on the subject...
Another thing.
When I see people like... I think there were two Loose Women commentators who mentioned that, you know, they were going to... Vanessa Feltz was one, and there was another one as well. Alison Hammond, who said, well, I'm going to stop going to these shows. Good. Because that would be a good idea. Because what you don't want is people getting onto Twitter and grandstanding and making a meal out of this whole predicament. As I said earlier, it's common sense, and those people shouldn't be building their Twitter feed and building up to a Twitter storm by saying, actually, it's all fine, everyone should be a sing-along and I want to go too. Because I think that's really unfair and they're self-validating.
Nigel, does this come down to some sort of entitlement? The idea that even if someone says, as Neil was saying, oh, would you mind shushing, I'm trying to watch the show, some people feel so entitled to carry on, and then that's when the fights start.
Well, some people are just plain rude. And I think that whatever happened there has probably got more to do with drink being taken than some kind of lockdown hangover. And obviously, if you go to the theatre and you're watching people perform, the last thing you're meant to do is interrupt them while they're doing it. It was perfectly clear. There were signs up at the theatre saying, don't sing along, please. Please don't sing along because we've got stars here who'll do it for you. So it just seems to me that it's nothing to do with lockdown. I do think behaviour has actually improved over the last 20, 30 years, certainly on football terraces it has. So it's just a case of somebody here, probably entitled, as you say, Steve, who was just being plain thoughtless.
Do you know, you mentioned alcohol, and that's really interesting, because someone was saying to me recently, the price of alcohol in the theatre now, like 20 quid for a glass of wine, means that people preload, I believe is the modern phrase. I mean, not that I'm accusing you of preloading, but, you know, is that part of the problem? People turn up to the theatre drunk.
Well, yes, I mean, people turn up into all sorts of places drunk because the alcohol is so expensive. But either way, I think you can blame the drink rather than some kind of lockdown problem that we've all lost our manners because we were locked up for so long.
Yeah. In fact, just because I have 3 kids who have gone 21 down to 16. The term preeing is, anyone's got teenage kids know, we're going out on a bit of a pre, Dad. What does that mean? It means I'm going to drink your alcohol, Dad, because it's cheap and free. Then when I've got ratted, then we'll go out and we'll buy 1 drink at the pub. So I can imagine people do pre a lot, and they've gone off to the Manchester here and I will always love you. And it's got out of control, and I'm sorry for that.
With it.
All around.
Right, coming up, we get the papers at 10:30 sharp with full panel reaction. But first, I'll be speaking to the Tory legend Anne Widdecombe about the legacy of Margaret Thatcher. Don't go anywhere.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now? Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to Mark Dolan Tonight with me, Stephen Allen. It's time now for The Newsmaker, in which we tackle the big story of the day in the company of a fearless commentator. Yesterday marked 10 years since the death of former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Britain's first female PM. Polarised opinions sweeping up millions of loyal admirers, mobilising throngs of adversaries, and even being bestowed with her own ism, which many politicos follow as a gospel to this day. Baroness Thatcher won 3 general elections and served for 18 years, the longest-serving PM of the 20th century. So what is the legacy of the Iron Lady a decade on? Let's ask someone who knew her. I'm delighted to be joined now by former Conservative Minister and colleague of the Iron Lady, Anne Widdecombe, joins me. So what would you say is Lady Thatcher's legacy?
Well, the legacy was that she turned the country around completely. It was known as the sick man of Europe when she took over in 79. By the time she was deposed in 1990, we were a hive of industry, a hive of enterprise. We were the envy of the Western world. But it wasn't only at home. She and Reagan and Gorbachev, between them, brought about the end of the Cold War. And which had been thought impossible only a few years earlier. And the great thing about Thatcher was she set out her stall, she said, this is what I'm going to do, and then she did it. And then she did it. And I think that is the crucial point. Now, she had big majorities, which enabled her to do those things. But there have been prime ministers since with big majorities who have wasted them.
What were your experiences of her?
I came into Parliament in 1987, so I really only had 3 years of her as Prime Minister, and then it was after that that I served as a minister throughout the entire Major administration. Therefore, I didn't work with her in government, so I had no direct experience of her in government. But what I did have, obviously, was experience of her as a leader, as a colleague. She was always personally very kind. But very, very focused on what she was doing. And in the end, I think that was her undoing because she believed the poll tax, for example, to be absolutely right, wouldn't be gainsaid on the issue, and stuck to it because it was what she believed in. And in the end, that was, I think, her undoing. She had got used to carrying people with her. She'd got used to people falling in with her vision. Didn't really handle it terribly well when suddenly people started going in the opposite direction.
Did that play a part in why she was certainly able to polarise opinion, should we say? As we saw by some of the nation's response when she passed, well, the two different extremes of response were both present. So do you think that's why she managed to polarise opinion so much?
I think she polarised opinion simply because she knew what she wanted to do and she did it, as I say. You know, and that actually is rarer than it sounds in politics. And people who agreed with what she was doing obviously thought she was wonderful. People who did not agree with what she was doing obviously took the exact opposite line. Now, when she came to power, all public utilities were delivered through vast state monopolies. She privatised them, and then Major and Blair carried on the privatisation programme. It was so manifestly right. It was an age in which the waitress in the boardroom was just as likely to have shares as the director. She wouldn't have as many, but she'd have shares. She'd have an interest in that company. It was an age in which people started to own their own homes as a matter of course. We forget now that Thatcher made that possible through tax relief on mortgages, something something that happened that we wouldn't dream of now. But that was because she wanted to encourage a trend. And so it was a completely different country when she had finished. And I dearly wish she'd gone on. I supported her in the election in which she was deposed. I supported Thatcher. I would, if I had my time over again, still support Thatcher. But she left a tremendous legacy. And, of course, she was the first woman Prime Minister, and she never whinged and never expected any special treatment because she was a woman.
Does modern-day politics try and bring people with them when they disagree? It's interesting that you said the two responses. If you agreed with what she was doing, you loved her. If you disagreed, it became more of a hate. Have we moved on from that way of doing it, or was that based more on the fact that she had the majority?
Obviously, the majority helped, but then Boris had an enormous majority, and what did he do with it? Blair had a tremendous majority, but he didn't always do the things that he said he was going to do. And I think what there is now is a tendency to want to please people. And of course, it is a simple fact of life, not only of political life, but of life in general. You cannot always please people. You are bound to upset some people. Now, Thatcher didn't care whom she upset, as long as she was convinced that what she was doing was right. We lack now that sort of conviction politician, a politician who will stand up and say, this is what I believe, this is what I'm going to do if I can, and that's that. Now it's all, a compromise and trying to bring people with you who don't want to be brought with you.
Interesting. Let's bring in my pundits as well, because Nigel, I know as a man of politics, you had interaction. You remember the days of Margaret Thatcher. What's your take on this?
But that aside, I think that if I was naming the two greatest prime ministers of recent years, it would be Margaret Thatcher and Tony Blair. And both of them had proper foundations, genuine political philosophy, which enabled them both to win 3 elections. And we've still got the legacy, as Anne just mentioned, the legacy of Thatcher today, privatised public utilities and services. That still exists because of Margaret Thatcher. The comfortably off pay 40% upper rate tax. Margaret Thatcher inherited 60% and dropped it down. She got it wrong very badly over the poll tax, that she should have realised that that was going to be a complete disaster. And that effectively is what brought her down. But I think by that time, and I'm interested that Anne would have voted for her at that last election, by that time I think she had lost it. And she should have followed David Cameron's adage that a Prime Minister goes a bit funny after 10 years.
Anne, I'd be interested to get your take on that as well then, Anne.
No, I don't think that Prime Ministers go a bit funny after 10 years, though I think it's a very amusing concept. I voted for her. First of all, I believed in the poll tax. I thought it was a perfectly fair system. But it wasn't sold properly. And she didn't really take the trouble to try and sell it properly. There was also a great deal of restlessness at that point on the backbenches. You know, we'd had 11 years, and it's easy to forget now. We were actually behind in the opinion polls, largely because of the poll tax. And in those days, the Conservative Party had a tremendous, hasn't got it now, had a tremendous survival instinct. And because we were behind in the polls, yeah, she was the greatest prime minister since Winston Churchill, but so what? We were behind in the polls, therefore we had to take action. And that was what the party sadly did. But I would have stuck with her because I think she had a few more years to give before, to use Cameron's phrase, the prime minister turned funny.
Let's think about the modern day world then, Anne. If I could ask for your opinion of what she would make of Rishi Sunak and possibly Boris Johnson.
Oh, I think she'd despair. I think she would utterly despair. Because to her, the anathema would be that you say you're going to do something and you don't do it. You know, you say you're going to deliver Brexit and then what you deliver is a massive fudge. You say you're going to preserve the Union and, you know, then you compromise Northern Ireland. And I think she would be horrified. I think she would thoroughly have approved of Boris, what Boris did with the vaccine. She'd certainly approve of what he did in Ukraine. She would have approved of all of that. But I think she would have looked round and she would have said, come on, what on earth do you believe in? And particularly, you know, when there's a very large majority. Now, people were quite scornful about Major, but he was trying to operate with a fraction of Thatcher's majority, and it's a different ballgame. When you've got a big majority, there's your opportunity. You can do things, and I think Thatcher would have been tearing her hair out at this lot, saying, you've got a majority, what are you doing with it?
Let's turn to the pundits as well for more on this. Linda, would you... Or rather, what's your thoughts on the way in which the legacy is remembered very differently, polar opposites by two different groups in this country?
Well, of course it would be, because there are two different groups who are affected by Margaret Thatcher, very, very clearly. But what I sometimes say to people is when I've looked at documentaries recently that I've watched about Margaret Thatcher, whether you are on that side or on that side, you can't argue with her conviction. And it comes through when she's talking, because when she answers questions, she's compelling, she resonates and she engages with the person. And that really makes a big, big difference. Too often these days, and I would certainly not include Anne in this because I think she's very direct in an interview, but people are overcoached and they give homogenised, boring answers that the public can't lock into. And that's a big problem.
Fascinating stuff.
There is actually, if I may interject at this point, there is another reason for that, which is that when a politician is giving an interview these days, he's thinking about what headline the interviewer wants. And therefore, it isn't always easy just to be blunt. I remember I took a tremendous risk once. I'd just been appointed Shadow Health Secretary. I'd literally come out of William Hague's office and the press shoved a microphone under my nose and said, "What is your health policy?" And I turned around and I said, "I haven't a clue." Come on, I've just been appointed. I haven't a clue, but I will tell you in you know, not too distant future. And I got away with that, but it's rare. I always
Only you
say
could get
that
away
if
with it, Anne. That's probably what we're thinking. Only you could be that direct and get away with it. Thank you very much, Anne Widdecombe, for being tonight's Newsmaker interview. Well, coming up, we've got the papers at 10:30 sharp with full pundit reaction. Plus, find out what led motorists in Cardiff to abandon their cars in the road. Don't go anywhere. We'll see you in 3.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:30 p.m, so it must be time for this. Time for a look at tomorrow morning's newspapers hot off the press. We'll start with the Daily Telegraph, which goes with GPs scrap services to cope with strikes. Also telling us well-wishers must be quick for chance to wave at King. Northern Ireland peace in fragile in wake of threat, says Minister. The Independent, hero pilot must be special case. Now former Army Chief Lord Dannatt backs our call to block the deportation of Afghan who flew with British forces. The Mirror goes with hospital trek scandal. 999 delays force 1 in 3 patients to make their own way to A&E. The Express front page, millions demand keep our banks open. This is bank's betrayal of loyal customers is laid bare in findings that millions prefer dealing with someone in person rather than online services. I'm sure that's not the main motivation for the banks. The Eye, pharmacists drafted in to offset hospital strike chaos. The Mail, Tory anger as Starmer stands by every word of Rishi's ad, a story that we were covering earlier on. And the Daily Star, Boffs warn ET is a prawn, which is scary, I suppose. Space boffins advising alien hunters' mission to Jupiter reckon that we're looking for something more like a prawn than a green man. And those are the front pages. I'm sure we'll get around to that prawn-related story at some point, but I feel we should start with the more important stories like the front page of the Telegraph, GPs scrapping services to cope with the strike. And we mentioned the strike earlier, but this is worrying because this, Neil, is a life and death situation for those who are in the need of care.
It is, and, you know, with lots of things are so coinciding this week. A lot of kids are away on school holidays, of course, as well. It's the Easter holidays, and so, you know, there might be knocks and scrapes and more trips maybe necessary to the emergency rooms. This is all worrying. And as we said earlier on when we were discussing it, you just need some cool heads now, literally this week, to get round a table tomorrow and let's start sorting this out. Let's talk sensibly to these people because they want to be heard and they want progress. As Nigel was saying earlier on, they don't want 35%. They're starting at a crazy number. What they want is they just want a realistic solution to this. As I think everyone who's been striking recently wants a realistic solution. It's pretty hard, though, for the government because, you know, inflation is running high. We don't have any money. We spent everything during COVID. And I think the hard thing is for so many people, we always come back to this, during COVID, money was just there. We just print more. Let's just give away money. It seemed to be like, let's just give away as much money as we need, just buy a way out of this. And now people are going, well, can we have some of that?
Yeah.
Well, no, really, you can understand people going, well, can we have some? Because with inflation raging as it is, you know, they're saying 26%, they're down realistically on where they were many years ago. It's a problem.
Changed our expectation of how free money is, how freely available it is, Linda.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely true. But if you look at my parents' generation and you had to save to buy things, we've moved so far away from that. It's really incredible. I think that people do expect to get things too easily these days. They don't expect to save and they don't expect to have to cut back. Having said that, wages in certain essential sectors have fallen way behind the level of inflation, and we have to do something about that. As I said earlier, I think the whole key here is the lack of economic growth. That's what's fundamentally causing a problem in this country, and that's a really, really hard thing to tackle.
Which is the long-term problem, and the first thing we've got to deal with is inflation.
Inflation, definitely.
And that is what is sparking all these pay claims. So inflation first, growth later. And you'll understand what the doctors are doing, that if you're going to go on strike, if you believe in the right to strike, you've got to make the strike work. I think that the headlines here, I mean, there's also one in the eye about pharmacists being drafted in to deal with it, matrons coming in. The Telegraph is talking about GPs. We are all going to struggle to get medical care this coming week.
Exactly, and I think you're right. You've got to concentrate on the game in hand, as it were. And the point is, I think you've got to get GPs really, really lined up so they deal with things effectively. I had a routine appointment. Well, I didn't, because I couldn't actually get the appointment made, and that's presumably because of this. You've got to get the GPs lined up, you've got to get the pharmacists lined up so that they can cover the gaps in the time it takes for people to get around the negotiating table. But by the way, I don't think economic growth is that it's just suddenly slowed down. I think that goes back 10 years. I think economic growth goes way back, way before we've seen inflation climb. And it's a really big problem.
It does. I mean, but
the impact of having such low interest rates kind of hid the problem.
Yeah, it did hide the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that Steve's point about the fact that Rishi Sunak spent so much money as Chancellor during COVID, we did begin to think, there's plenty of free dosh out there they can give out. I mean, curiously, what Rishi Sunak did was what John McDonnell would have done had he become Chancellor.
Yeah.
And it would have played very differently in the press, wouldn't it, I suppose? There is also the fact that normally, when you do surveys of how much you support industrial action, it's quite surprising how much support all of the industrial action seems to have had, according to the polls, and who knows how much we trust them. But in part, is that because normally, during this, you'd have to explain what inflation is and how it's impacting what you're earning, whereas right now, everyone knows the word inflation.
We do. And of course, everyone's bringing up, go back to 2008, look at that last big recession, look how it's 15 years now of austerity where people haven't had really good wage rises. And, 15 years is a hell of a time. If you have a little bit of inflation every year and then compound it over 15 years, you do see where they've come up with that figure saying, we're 26% worse off now as a junior doctor. You do wonder whether it's slightly a generational thing that younger people tend to demand more money and potentially have the chance to get on better in their careers and earn more earlier than maybe people of a different generation, maybe. But I still think we know they work really hard. We know they probably do require more money, as lots of these different people striking at the moment, but no one seems to be talking sensibly, or so we know. Maybe they are. I'm really hoping they are behind the scenes, because but we're not hearing anything from the government. We need someone just to be a bit more... We need a Thatcher to come in and sort this out.
Well, let's quickly just have another panic about healthcare-related things. 1 in 3 999 patients, this is the front page of the Mirror, have made their own way to hospital due to the record waits for ambulances. At the time, I was joking about when all the strikes were happening of the paramedics, that I go for a run, but on those days I was going to run around the hospital just in case. But these are actual people thinking, no, I'm a 999 patient, but I'm not going to risk going in an ambulance all day.
There's 999 patients, and there's 999 patients which are called red flag patients. Now, they don't do any driving to hospital because they're the big priority cases of strokes and potential heart attacks. And so they're over there. But there are an awful lot of people who dial 999 who don't need to dial 999. Yep. They could be dialing 111 or they could be going to their doctor, or they could be going to the pharmacist. And I do actually think that right now we've got to start taking a little bit of responsibility about not dashing off to A&E for the slightest reason. We've got to look at this sensibly and cope with it.
The reason people go to A&E as their first port of call, because every other attempt to get your health dealt with seems to hit a wall. If you try and see a GP, you'll end up doing some sort of Zoom relationship.
It's difficult, and I was on this show a couple of months ago, and I got a GP's appointment within 48 hours. There was no problem at all.
That's who your GP was.
It's so easy. I had to turn the first one down because they said, "Can you come now?" So I made it for the next day. Now it's much, much harder because we're facing this industrial action. But there are options. 111, you can call 111, you can go to the pharmacist, you can think about it. You could not go to the doctor because you've got a common cold and it won't do any good.
I mean, long term, we've discussed this, and I've seen it many times on this and other programmes, where we just have to look at how dependent have we all got on the NHS? Do we phone them up for the most ridiculous thing? Are we getting drugs when we really don't need them anymore? Are they prescribing stuff we really don't need anymore? You know, the whole thing needs to be looked at. Right now, though, that's sort of long term that needs to be... How do we use our NHS? How do we make it effective for 70 million people, not for the 45 it was originally created for? You know, our population has exploded, right? So that's another issue, and they're living longer. So all these... But this week, we need to sit around a table.
Well, indeed. After the break, we have a couple more front pages still to show you. Plus, I'll ask my pundits if they will be watching the new Grease TV show and whether they've ever abandoned a car due to a traffic jam. We'll see you soon.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway...
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We've got a brand new lineup every Saturday night on GB News.
From 6 p.m, I'll give you my unique take on the world today.
Then at 7, it's me, Calvin Robinson, with my Common Sense Crusade.
New to GB News is the Saturday 5.
5 times the opinion. Join us every Saturday from 8 p.m. as we debate the week's stories.
With us 4, plus a special guest.
And at 9, of course, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Brand new Saturday nights on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and thank you for your emails you've been sending in about the various things we've been discussing. Some more here. Bridget, on the topic of Margaret Thatcher, says, Margaret Thatcher won her first election without making a lot of promises that she wasn't aware that she could carry out. She spoke as a housewife having a budget to live on. Then, on the topic of the incident at the Bodyguard musical, Richard says, if you go to a show with a big number at the end and don't think people are going to sing along, then you are either a fool or a toffee-nosed plonker. Not sure which one you think I am. Actually, no, I think I know which one you think I am. John on the doctor's strike says, was there not a time when there would be no negotiation under duress? Surely the threat of planned strike by doctors is duress. I'm not taking sides, just asking a question. Interesting points. Let's move on to some more of the front pages then. Still here with my pundits. We've got GB News senior political commentator and Fleet Street legend Nigel Nelson, journalist and broadcaster Lindy Dooley, and radio legend Neil Fox. As we look to the next front page, The Times. Labour will blame PM for crashing economy. Controversial attack ads go on, as we mentioned earlier, but specifically looking at the economy. Plus also on their front page, surgeons face Me Too moment over sexism. And then we have the Guardian's front page. UK is not close to being a racially just society, finds 2 years study. Also on their front page, King's green energy firm investigated for gas leak, which I imagine is less funny than the headline makes it seem. And also, I should have said, every single front page also has this the royal pictures. And we were talking off-air about, I mean, everyone seems to think that Kate's coat is working really well. Just a brief mention of that. Good coat.
Great coat. Maybe Alexander McQueen, actually Sarah Burton for Alexander McQueen, but the choice of royal blue, that's a stellar choice for Easter weekend. And actually, I think Camilla's wearing royal blue as well. I mean, it's such a beautiful tableau now. When you look at the royal family, I think they look absolutely impeccable. Real star quality.
If there's a blue named after you, it'd be rude not to, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I thought. Funnily enough, I think only the Times actually used royal blue. I can't think of how the others missed it.
I suppose we should look to the serious story here of Labour will blame the PM for crashing the economy. Again, we come down to this issue, Nigel, about whether you should be blaming the party or blaming the man.
Yeah, I think you can probably blame the man for this one. I mean, you know, that obviously, as Linda said earlier, that Rishi Sunak wasn't even an MP for 5 years when Labour criticising him over not being concerned about rapists. He was concerned about the economy, so that is directly down to him as Chancellor and now as Prime Minister. So I think you can actually do an attack line against that, and that would be fair. The important thing for Keir Starmer is, for goodness sake, appear to the voters as being fair about it. Certainly go into the Tory record. Don't blame Rishi Sunak for stuff that he wasn't responsible for, in the same way that when Boris Johnson blamed Keir Starmer for not prosecuting Jimmy Savile, he wasn't responsible for that. So he shouldn't go down that road, but certainly perfectly reasonable to attack the former Chancellor, current Prime Minister.
Yeah, I mean, good point there. Do you think, Neil, we're going to be talking about ETAT to help out again?
Well, I really wish, and I remember growing up, all the ads where it was either Tories or Labour, right? And now, of course, it's about people. It's almost like our PMs have become presidential, how they talk about it in America now. So it's just about the one person. And, of course, the way our politics works, it's not all about one person. It's about parties and it's about cabinets, hopefully having a smart bunch. You know, Mrs Thatcher had an amazing cabinet of incredible people that helped her carry out what she wanted to do and also were contributing enormously to that success. And I think there are hopefully I would like to see is that maybe when the Tories come back, it's not just tit-for-tat retaliatory. It's not just about Keir Starmer, although it's been very easy. It was all about Corbyn, got rid of Corbyn. Now it's about Starmer. I wish it was just about Labour, and they were talking about the Tories as a government and what they've done. But obviously it's easy to bash the person, but on this case, if it's about the economy, as Nigel said, he was the Chancellor, right? So, OK, if you want to pick on someone, he was the guy in charge at that moment.
We'll move on to this one now, because I can report that yet another staple of pop culture is getting a relaunch. Yes, legendary 1970s film Grease is returning as a TV prequel, which will reportedly feature a multicultural, all-female lineup and also, somewhat strangely, a song about white supremacy. Linda, I'll turn to you first. Will you be watching the Grease reboot?
No.
No?
Absolutely not.
Don't want to be a pink lady?
No.
You are?
Bam, this evening. Yes, that's true.
Inverted colours.
I kind of did like I wasn't kind of over keen on the original film. I thought it was interesting, you know, quite entertaining. But what I can't understand, I think Neil and I were talking about this earlier, is why can't people just come up with a really original idea? Why do they have to remake anything?
Well, I mean, there are original things on TV, but you know the actual answer is because if you write an original thing, I mean, you could, instead of calling it the Pink Ladies, you could just have a thing about school gangs for girls. No one would watch it. But you got the word Grease in all the promotion. All of a sudden, we're interested, and we're talking about it.
I'm just being a T-bird here. Look, I'm an old T-bird. She's, you know, I'm not going to say it. No, I'm not going to use that old word. Hang on, sorry. Sorry, no, but look, Grease was, what, 1979 now? It's a long time ago. Look, this is a prequel. This is apparently the story, because I tried to read, because I loved Grease. It was a great film, a fun film, but I'm sure some of it now people would probably have a few problems with, like so many things when you look back. But for its time, it was a great movie for its time with some great songs. This is the backstory of how the T-Birds came along and how the Pink Ladies were formed. And there's a little bit of me going, of course it'll be very woke and if it's going to make it today, you've got to make it fit today's audience, of course. But I'm slightly groaning as well inside, going, can't we just leave it as it was? It was a great make a programme about something else.
But Nigel, both Grease 1 and 2 were effectively kind of woke. They're about the social awkwardness and not being the person who fits in straight away. Obviously, Grease 2 is terrible, but they were roughly the same film.
Yeah, I mean, it was about growing up, and it was about how difficult adolescence is for all those people concerned. And that was what, you know, it wasn't about the politics of it. It wasn't about social issues that we're experiencing now. However, I'd like to see how it pans out on the basis that we do make remakes of stuff. I mean, look, you know, that
That's true, yeah.
Something like Romeo and Juliet becomes West Side Story. We've got Macbeth, which can be set in an East European dictatorship. So I'm not against the idea of remaking something. And also, issues that happen now also existed in the 1950s. We may just not have talked about them.
Yeah. And one thing, to be fair, we have to see the programme before we can really comment on it. No, we do, because you know what it's like. They pick out a couple of juicy bits that we're all going to go, oh, no, this sounds awful. And it might actually be brilliant. So maybe let's just, come on, I'll watch it first, then let's get back on discussing.
That's way too
How's
fair.
that?
Look,
is that too fair?
Voice of reason, I'm loving it. Well, finally tonight, have you encountered any traffic jams this Easter? I hope they were not as bad as the one that some shoppers encountered in a Cardiff multi-storey car park yesterday. Traffic lights outside the building were blamed for a 3-hour queue, which led to some people just abandoning their cars. Neil, no one liked a traffic jam. Ever just given up and thought, I'll buy a new car?
No, that's why I ride a motorbike round town, though, because I just get so fed up with the traffic jams everywhere. But no, I wouldn't leave my car. But I've jumped out of many a cab, as I'm sure we all have, because you're sitting there not going anywhere, just watching the meter rack up and think, what's the point? I'll get out and walk. It will be quicker. But abandoning my car, no. I mean, what happens to the car? Because then everyone else who's stuck behind your car, they ain't going to be moving, are they? Let's be honest.
That's a good point. I mean, I used to live near Bluewater, and once a year it was a thing. You've got to be careful, because they'd have 8-hour queues as people try and get out, because the way the roads are set around there. And Nigel, you're around that, roughly.
I'm round that way. No, and I wouldn't abandon a car, but here's why. That a few days ago, stopped outside a post office to post a letter. I leapt out of my wife's car, went in there, came out and tried to get into the wrong car. She then makes the point that if I ever abandoned my car, I'd never be able to find it again.
That's true. And Linda, ever just given up and thought, you know what, I'll move and start a new life elsewhere? This queue's too bad.
I kind of did, because I moved to a pretty little town called Marlow, because I got so sick of the traffic in the part of West London where I live, which was truly horrendous, because Hammersmith Bridge closed, right, and then everything poured onto 2 narrow roads, and there was a rail trap with 4 level crossings. It was like a complete nightmare. So I moved out, and now I'm very happy, because I'm very rarely in a traffic jam. Maybe 6 cars.
You effectively were living in probably the first test of one of those low-traffic neighbourhoods. Areas where you just can't drive.
Oh, no. This is like 20-mile-an-hour zones all over Richmond.
Yeah.
I hate going back there. I hate it. I had to go back for Sunday lunch today. What a nightmare. I mean, can you drive? Actually, don't you find it difficult to drive at 20 miles an hour?
Well, you do have to practice it, or of course you could get annoyed by 20 miles an hour and just abandon your car. Just go for a walk. If you find a car left on the A41 on the way home, it'll be my fault. Well, I think we can all agree, though. You're right, it does seem a bit harsh, because I imagine all of the things you've just bought in the shopping centre are in the car. So it seems silly to abandon the car. You just wasted all that day. Well, listen, thank you very much to my brilliant pundits tonight. Thank you to all the guests who've kept us informed. Thank you for all of you watching, and of course, Headliners is on the way for you next. Mark Dolan will return to do this job properly. It's been a pleasure doing this over the last few days. An Easter treat for me and hopefully a bearable Easter treat for you. But get yourself set up for the newspapers being reviewed on the way next as Headliners takes over. See you next time.
Hello there, very good evening. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. We're seeing a change to something more unsettled as we head throughout tonight and over the next few days. As high pressure drifts its way off, it's allowing these weather fronts to start pushing in from the Atlantic and bring us these spells of rain and showers. The isobars also squeezing together a bit more, so we will certainly see a windy night to come, particularly around coastal areas of Scotland where there is the risk of some gales. The rain moving from Northern Ireland into Western Scotland, where it could be heavy for a time. Generally across England and Wales, the rain will come and go and will be a bit patchier through the night. Some clearer spells for Northern Ireland and Western Scotland later on, but that will allow temperatures to just drop off a bit more here. Elsewhere, underneath the cloud, it's going to be a mild night. We won't see much lower than 9 or 10 degrees Celsius. It means it also will be a cloudy start to Easter Monday, the rain lingering across the southeast until the afternoon, really, and also across Shetland. Behind that, we will see some sunny spells, but quite frequent showers moving in as well. These could be heavy in places with the risk of some hail and thunder. Temperatures slightly down compared to Sunday, still around average for the time of year, but there will be that fresh breeze